exact biological protocol utilized by the top 1% of global earners, completely bypass cognitive fatigue, is actively being hidden behind the modern illusion of the hustle culture. The window of opportunity to access this classified neurobiological reset is rapidly shrinking, and any individual who fails to understand the clinical reality exposed in the next few minutes will be permanently locked out of top-tier intellectual and financial dominance. Billions of exhausted adults falsely believe that sacrificing sleep, grinding for 14 hours a day, and enduring extreme levels of daily stress is the absolute mandatory path to high-level status. This is a catastrophic, heavily engineered medical deception. Those who remain willfully blind to the unfiltered biological breakdown exposed right now are actively choosing to accelerate their own cognitive decline. They will remain permanently trapped in a cycle of fake productivity, operating at a fraction of their true genetic potential, and generating massive profits for the system while their own neuroarchitecture actively rots from the inside out. Elite earners absolutely refuse to work hard in the traditional, chaotic sense because they understand a terrifying biological truth. Extreme physical and mental exhaustion destroys the prefrontal cortex and guarantees permanent biological poverty. They do not rely on cheap motivation. They strictly manipulate their central nervous system to operate in a state of frictionless, silent execution. Why do the top 1% refuse to work hard? To fully comprehend why the relentless 14-hour corporate grind guarantees biological failure, one must critically examine the autonomic nervous system of the average modern worker. Society heavily incentivizes a state of chronic, unyielding hyperarousal. When a human being forces their physical body to execute complex analytical tasks while severely sleep-deprived and heavily reliant on synthetic central nervous system stimulants like high-dose caffeine, they are essentially triggering a continuous, low-grade survival response. The brain's threat detection center, the amygdala, perceives this artificial urgency as a literal physical threat to survival. Consequently, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, entirely bypassing logical thought, forces the adrenal glands to constantly synthesize and release massive volumes of cortisol and epinephrine directly into the cardiovascular system. This highly toxic physiological state is not elite productivity. It is a clinical manifestation of severe biological panic. How does a dysregulated nervous system kill elite productivity? This dysregulated nervous system violently diverts precious metabolic energy away from the prefrontal cortex, which is the highly evolved brain region strictly responsible for advanced problem-solving, impulse control, and long-term strategic execution. The modern fake performer feels incredibly busy because their heart rate is artificially elevated, their breathing is shallow, and their mind is racing with chaotic electrical activity. However, their actual high-level cognitive output collapses entirely. They are physically incapable of recognizing deep market patterns, executing flawless high-stakes decisions, or maintaining unfragmented focus because their brain is constantly battling severe internal systemic inflammation. Every single hour spent grinding in this highly reactive, cortisol-drenched state actively degrades the physical density of the neural pathways. The brain's internal immune cells, the microglia, are forcefully activated by this chronic stress, releasing highly corrosive inflammatory cytokines that bathe the surrounding delicate neural networks in severe oxidative stress. The individual is merely performing the frantic physical act of working without any of the neurological machinery required to actually succeed. They are grinding themselves into a state of permanent adrenal fatigue, destroying the biological foundation required to generate genuine, generational wealth. What is the neurobiology of a frictionless focus baseline? In stark clinical contrast, the absolute global elite operate under a completely different neurobiological framework. They ruthlessly protect what advanced neuroscience defines as a frictionless focus baseline. True wealth creation and elite intellectual dominance do not require relentless, frantic physical movement. They require the flawless execution of a few critical decisions, which can only occur in a state of profound internal silence. The brains of elite performers consistently operate within highly efficient alpha and theta brainwave frequencies during deep work blocks. This specific, highly optimized neurochemical state allows the human brain to process incredibly complex, high-stress variables without ever triggering an inflammatory cortisol response. By maintaining a perfectly stable baseline of endogenous dopamine and keeping the autonomic nervous system deeply relaxed in a parasympathetic dominant state, the elite individual can sustain uninterrupted, absolute focus for hours without experiencing any cognitive friction or decision fatigue. They literally bypass cognitive fatigue entirely because their biological engine is not constantly leaking metabolic energy through chronic anxiety, limbic panic, or cheap digital overstimulation. The top 1% never attempt to force productivity through sheer brute force willpower. Willpower is a rapidly depleting biological resource heavily dependent on immediate blood glucose levels in the prefrontal cortex. Relying on it is a massive evolutionary disadvantage. Instead, elite earners engineer an internal environment where high-level execution feels entirely effortless and inevitable. This phenomenon, known in clinical psychology as transient hypofrontality, temporarily suppresses the inner critic and the perception of time, allowing pure, unadulterated flow states to take over the biological machine. This extreme biological sovereignty allows the true high performer to accomplish more meaningful, high-status, mathematically leveraged output in a single 90-minute block of absolute silence than the exhausted, overstimulated masses can achieve in an entire week of chaotic, fragmented, and highly reactive labor. Why is the modern hustle culture an engineered biological trap? The aggressive mainstream promotion of the relentless daily hustle is not a cultural accident. It is a highly calculated, heavily engineered biological trap specifically designed to keep the global population exhausted, highly reactive, and incredibly profitable. They execute daily, aggressive biological protocols to forcefully regulate their endocrine system and command their biology with absolute precision. The foundation of this control begins with the ruthless, non-negotiable protection of the circadian rhythm. When an individual's central nervous system is completely fried from constantly chasing the illusion of hard work, they become biologically incapable of deep, independent, critical thought. A completely exhausted brain cannot plan for generational wealth, challenge established systemic structures, or build sovereign assets. Instead, the exhausted human physically requires constant external pacification to merely survive the day. They desperately crave cheap digital dopamine, heavily processed hyperpalatable foods, and constant synthetic entertainment simply to numb the severe pain of their own biological burnout. The entire modern attention economy and the corporate consumer matrix rely absolutely on this massive population of chronically stressed, sleep-deprived, neurologically compromised individuals. By convincing the masses that sleeping less and working longer is a moral virtue, the system successfully harvests the individual's most valuable biological resource, their cognitive lifespan. Modern hustle mentality actively glorifies the exact behaviors that cause severe oxidative stress, serotonin depletion, and early-stage neurodegeneration. It is a brilliant, silent, and highly destructive scam. The exhausted individual genuinely believes they are sacrificing their present comfort to build a better future, while in clinical reality, they are permanently destroying the very neuroarchitecture required to ever reach that future. They are willingly trading their capacity for absolute intellectual dominance for the fleeting illusion of being busy. The system extracts their labor, drains their physical vitality, and leaves them with a severely shrunken hippocampus and a completely shattered dopamine baseline. They are literally grinding themselves into permanent biological submission. How do elite earners biologically control their cortisol levels? Escaping this engineered trap and ascending to the top tier of human performance requires an absolute, uncompromising mastery over the body's physiological stress response. Elite earners do not leave their cortisol levels or their nervous system regulation to chance. The absolute top-tier performers understand that morning cortisol spikes, known as the cortisol awakening response, are biologically necessary for alertness and metabolic activation. However, chronic, elevated cortisol throughout the afternoon and evening is highly toxic and neurodegenerative. To prevent this severe biological leakage, they strictly control their exposure to artificial blue light, recognizing it as a severe neurotoxin that shatters the pineal gland's ability to synthesize melatonin and initiates a cascade of metabolic dysfunction. Furthermore, the elite actively utilize acute, controlled physiological stressors, such as deliberate cold exposure, thermal stress, or highly structured hypoxia through advanced breathwork protocols to artificially train the vagus nerve. This intense, targeted conditioning forces the autonomic nervous system to become highly resilient, drastically increasing heart rate variability. This metric is the ultimate biological indicator of a nervous system that can rapidly transition from intense focus to deep recovery. This allows the optimized individual to remain completely calm, biologically stable, and intellectually lethal even when facing extreme external pressure, massive financial risk, or highly chaotic environments. They do not react blindly to stress. They absorb it, process it through a stable prefrontal cortex, and immediately neutralize it. By maintaining this pristine, tightly controlled cortisol baseline, the elite earner ensures that their executive function remains fully online, completely immune to the emotional volatility, brain fog, and limbic panic that consistently destroys the average, overworked individual. What is the clinical protocol to completely bypass cognitive fatigue? The exact, classified clinical protocol required to reset the nervous system and permanently bypass cognitive fatigue is actively being suppressed by the algorithms because a genuinely rested, highly optimized human being is incredibly dangerous to the established economic hierarchy. Reclaiming this biological advantage requires the immediate, violent rejection of the 40-hour hustle illusion. The protocol mandates a strict, uncompromising period of deep nervous system rehabilitation. The individual must forcefully isolate themselves from all cheap digital stimulation, rapid context switching, and synthetic dopamine triggers. This is not a casual digital detox. It is a mandatory clinical intervention to allow the severely scarred dopamine receptors in the basal ganglia to physically heal, upregulate, and permanently regain their primal sensitivity to difficult tasks. The daily workflow must be entirely restructured to prioritize massive, uninterrupted blocks of deep delta wave sleep. Delta sleep is the only biological state where the brain's highly advanced macro-waste clearance mechanism, the glymphatic system, fully activates. During these critical hours, cerebrospinal fluid violently washes through the brain, rapidly flushing highly toxic beta-amyloid proteins, metabolic waste, and accumulated oxidative stress entirely out of the skull. Without this daily, aggressive neurochemical cleansing, severe cognitive fatigue and early-onset neurodegeneration are absolutely guaranteed. Next, the biological machine must be trained to operate in absolute silence. The reliance on artificial urgency, loud music, and constant external pressure must be completely severed. The individual must execute their highest leverage analytical tasks during their peak biological windows, matching specific brainwave states to specific types of labor, completely detached from the chaotic digital noise of the masses. True high performance is not loud. It is a silent, ruthless, and entirely frictionless execution. It is the absolute domination of the internal biological environment, rendering the individual completely immune to fatigue, distraction, and systemic manipulation. The window of opportunity to access these specific longevity and cognitive optimization protocols is rapidly shrinking. The algorithmic matrix is heavily incentivized to suppress this unfiltered clinical reality in order to keep the masses biologically weak, perpetually distracted, and continuously scrolling. Refusing to aggressively reset the nervous system today is a direct, conscious choice to accept permanent intellectual mediocrity and a significantly short cognitive lifespan. The cost of inaction is absolute and mathematically certain. Every single day spent participating in the fake hustle mentality is another day of irreversible neurodegeneration, structural brain shrinkage, and massive financial loss. Elite biological dominance is fully available, but it requires executing ruthless tactical commands that the mainstream productivity gurus will never reveal. Subscribe to this channel right now to secure the neurobiological baseline and permanently reject this engineered digital deception. The theoretical framework provided in this breakdown is only the foundation. The algorithm constantly attempts to bury these classified methods before they can spread. Do not allow the system to harvest your nervous system. Take absolute permanent control.